Hey, welcome back. In this mini lecture, I'll be talking about crisis communication. In this section, it'll be pre-crisis stage. As you see here, for an overview of crisis communication, there's three major stages: pre-crisis, crisis, and post-crisis. I'll be talking about pre-crisis. Just overall, the objective of pre-crisis planning is to prevent and lessen the negative outcomes of a crisis. You want to protect the organization, stakeholders, and industry from damage, depending on who you're working for. That would include any types of financial loss, reputation loss, or if the identity of the organization or any stakeholders is in fact altered. In terms of pre-crisis, I'll first talk about scanning. What is scanning? It's looking out for potential sources of crises. The various areas you can scan to find out: issue sources, where you look at industry-wide issue analysis or something specific to the organization. Another big area is risk assessment sources, various implicit issues to your organization or stakeholders. And then stakeholder relationship sources, how the stakeholders relate to one another. First, for issue sources, you can find out potential crises by scanning newspapers, business magazines, television news, trade journals, public opinion polls, medical or science journals, or online through various web pages or news groups. You can also do some risk assessment sources and scan those as well. Say if your company has safety or accident records, ethical climate surveys, financial audits, liability exposure, worker compensation, product tampering, risk audits, or sexual harassment exposure. By looking at these risks, various risks, you can find out various crises that could come up. You can also see various relationships that the company organization has with its stakeholders. You can check out shareholder resolutions, stakeholder complaints, rumors or grapevines at conventions, speculative discussions, or potential boycotts. From all this, you want to keep these principles in mind. You want to keep in continual contact with your key constituents, and you want to listen to what they're saying to see if, again, you can surface any types of possible crises. After scanning, you want to do some assessing of your situation. You want to evaluate your issues along two dimensions: the likelihood of a crisis happening and the impact of it. The greater likelihood and the greater impact, obviously, you want to focus on that. You want to evaluate your risk with a risk management grid, and you want to evaluate various relational threats, such as who has power to leverage various assets maybe against you, legitimacy, how those relate to your values, and willingness as their desire for action. There are various scenarios, rankings, and returns on time. And from these three assessment areas, you can look at issues, risks, relationships, intuitions, and history. There are a number of historical types of crises that you could assess: natural disasters, malevolence like kidnapping, product tampering, terrorism, technical breakdowns, challenges like boycotts, strikes, lawsuits, government actions, mega damage like oil spills, radioactivity, organizational misdeeds, workplace violence, and rumors. Finally, you want to look at your designing tools and systems to help with you before a crisis even occurs. For example, it would be prudent to select a crisis management team, select spokespeople or persons, develop a crisis management plan, and prepare a crisis communication system. In terms of a crisis management team, you want to have a cross-functional group that's designated to handle any crisis. Some characteristics of a good crisis management team include that they have the ability to work together for conflict management. You want to be able to apply the crisis management plan to manage stress. You want to be able to listen to others and respect what their views are. You want to make the right decisions, obviously, and you want to communicate as proactively as possible. There are various roles in your crisis management team. These include legal, security, safety, PR, obviously, operations, top management, the highest levels like a CEO, and a victim manager who will deal with various victims. You want to make sure to train people, as 63% of companies do in fact do this. And when you're selecting a spokesperson, a major principle you want to remember is to have one voice is more important than one person, because again, you may find that not one person can handle all your requests if the crisis is big. The role is to manage the accuracy and consistency of the messages coming from the organization. You want to have them as accurate and consistent as possible. Communication during a crisis should be guided by the 5 C's. Concern for who's being affected, clarity of message, control of message, confidence in communicating that message, and competence in communicating that message. Some spokesperson skills you might want to look towards. Make sure that he or she appears pleasant on camera, both visually and non-verbally. That they can answer questions effectively about the crisis in question. You don't want them to argue with reporters. Try to avoid no comment because that seems to imply guilt. Challenge incorrect information if it's out there. Assess assumptions of questions that are made to you and legitimize whatever the concerns are in the questions if you can. Present information as clearly as possible. Avoid jargon that regular folk might not know, and provide structure to your responses. You want to develop your crisis management plan. What is a crisis management plan? It's a potential action plan in case a crisis comes to fruition. You want to use it during your crisis, and you want to focus on how to deal with that crisis. What is it not? Overly detailed because the actual substance of it may change depending on the crisis in question. You don't want to be rigid because you will likely need to be flexible about what you're doing. Some components of a crisis management plan include an introduction, usually by the CEO of the company, rehearsal dates for how to go about enacting the plan, crisis management team members, contact sheets to make sure that you can contact them quickly, crisis assessment, an overview, a way to make it short so it's easy to understand, and likely scenarios that could happen. An incident report form to document what happened during the crisis, proprietary information, you want to list what that is, a strategy worksheet that you can engage in, stakeholder contact sheet for those people outside the organization that are important, crisis control center, like a sort of a headquarters to deal with the crisis, the location of where it will be, what its capabilities are, and a post-crisis evaluation. Assuming you survive, you want to make sure that you improve for next time. And finally, you want to prepare a crisis communication system. You want to physically set up that system and prepare various tools that will be used within it, an internet, phones, etc. And you want to prepare your team. That was crisis communication for pre-crisis. Thanks for watching. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.